Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the RDX Sports Podcast. I'm Simon Head. We're recording this on a Sunday afternoon after a double helping of MMA on this side of the pond. We had UFC Fight Night Paris, Renato Moicano versus Benoit Saint-Denis at the Accor Arena. And in Glasgow, Scotland, we had the PFL Europe Playoffs, headlined by a showcase fight, Stevie Ray versus Lewis Long, Scotland versus Wales, in an all UK battle of veteran grapplers. And we had a superb finish in that one. Let's just roll straight in and talk about it. Stevie Ray looked like this was going to be his last fight in professional mixed martial arts. This was, I think, his 39th career fight. I think that was the. I think that's the stat. 39 career fights, taking on Lewis the foot long. How that man doesn't have a advertising deal with Subway, I will never know. But moving on from that. A real battle to see which one would have the edge on the mat. Both very grapple first in their approaches, and it turned out to be Stevie Ray who would get the job done on home soil, and he did it with a Scottish twister, a move that he basically named and invented himself, getting the job done against Lewis Long, who, you know, he was on the defensive for pretty much the whole fight. Got taken down very early. Stevie Ray just bossing the grappling exchanges from top position, and Lou Long just having to really defend for his life and try and get through the round, and doing a pretty good job of it, to be fair. Stevie Ray locked up a guillotine choke, a rear naked choke, an arm bar, a face crank. I think he was just rolling through his full repertoire of submissions, and every time he managed to get one on, Lewis Long managed to survive and then escape until he got caught in the modified twister, which is known as the Scottish twister. Stevie Ray got that locked up, and Lewis Long was forced to tap with 36 seconds left in the first round. Co-main event also saw a big win for Scotland. Rob Whiteford versus Roger Huerta, two 41-year-old veterans of the game going head-to-head in a 150-pound catchweight fight there at the Hydro. Whiteford getting the job done on the scorecards. Unanimous decision. And that was a big win for him, both for him and Stevie. You know, I remember being at the first ever UFC show up there at the Hydro in Glasgow, and Stevie Ray and Rob Whiteford. It was a big night for both of those guys, and I remember Rob Whiteford in particular, a really emotional win for him on the night. Was it Paul Redmond he beat? I think it might have been Paul Redmond that he beat, but it was. It was a spectacular night for Scottish MMA that night. So it was great to see two Scots at the top of the card getting the job done. But it wasn't just two Scots at the top of the card getting the job done. It was three, because just before the co-main and the main, Mark Ewan, Scottish lightweight, moving up to 6-1 as he looks to build his career. Obviously, Stevie Ray, Rob Whiteford, two veterans of the game, approaching the swan songs of their respective careers. We don't know. I mean, this could be the last time we've seen them in action. Stevie Ray hinted that he might like to come back, telling Don Davis and Pete Murray to get the wallet out and stump up some cash so that he can come back and fight again. Rob Whiteford, who knows? I'm not too sure what his career status is going to look like after this. Great for him to get a win on home soil. Will that be the perfect way for him to ride into the sunset? We shall see. But one person who won't be riding off into the sunset anytime soon is Mark Ewan, who got a superb first round Darce choke victory over France's Yacine Chatou, and I think he'll be pushing hard for a spot on the PFL Europe lightweight roster next season, assuming there is another lightweight roster next season. I would imagine that he will want to be a part of that. I'm sure Dan Hardy will be very, very keen to get him locked up for that season. So looking forward to seeing what happens with Mark Ewan. But that was a good, impressive performance from him. And those three fights were sort of the three showcase fights at the top of the card. But the PFL Europe Playoffs were all about the semi-final stages of the PFL Europe second season. We had the women's flyweights. We had the men's lightweights, the men's welterweights, and the men's bantamweights, all in action. The final four from each taking place. And the good thing I liked about this, and that they kind of didn't do this last time, or at least the PFL haven't in the global season, they don't always put the two fights from the same weight class back to back. And I think that sort of breaks up the storytelling a little bit sometimes. What they did here is they put the weight classes back to back. So we had both women's flyweight fights one after the other, both men's lightweight fights one after the other, then the welterweights, then the bantamweights. It just makes the whole storytelling aspect of it much stronger. It really solidifies the final matchup because you've just seen both fighters win in back-to-back fights. Then they face off after the second fight. Everything is set, locked, loaded, ready to go for the PFL Europe finals, which I think are December the 16th over in Lyon, France. So looking forward to that. And we now know who will be in those finals. In the women's flyweight division, Poland's Paulina Wisniewska defeated compatriot Karolina Wojcik by unanimous decision over the 3 rounds to book her place in the final. She's now undefeated at 4-0, and she will face undefeated opposition from right here in the UK. Chanel Dyer getting past Valentina Skitidze via split decision. It was a close fight. I'm not sure that Skitidze did enough to win on the scorecards. I was a bit confused when I saw that there was a split decision, but no doubt about it, Skitidze was an incredibly tough, incredibly durable, and a very, very tricky customer for Chanel Dyer to deal with. And Chanel's only like 23 years of age. The sky is the limit for her coming out of GB top team, and she did superbly well to cope with non-stop 15 minutes of pressure from Valentina Skitidze. But it was Dyer who got the win. She goes into the final, and she'll take on Paulina Wisniewska in the women's flyweight final. The winner, of course, getting $100,000 and potentially a spot in the global season next year. We shall see. Then it was the men's lightweights who were up next. Connor Hughes from England getting the job done on the scorecards, moving to 10-1, defeating Spain's Ignacio Capella. Good, strong performance from Connor Hughes. Just doing what he needed to do. I'm sure he would have wanted to get the finish on UK soil. But when you're in tournament play like this, the win is really all that matters. And that is exactly what he got. And now he stands one win away from that $100,000 prize and the title of PFL Europe lightweight champion. But if he's going to get there, he's going to have to get past the champion. Jakub Kazuba has won the title twice, and he is 13-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. And he completed a pretty forgettable night for the Skitidze family, because having seen Valentina get beaten in her semi-final fight earlier in the evening, her brother Daniele Skitidze ended up losing a unanimous decision to Jakub Kazuba in the second men's semi-final. So we're going to have Kazuba versus Hughes for the 155-pound title. Sorry, Kazuba has not won it twice. He has won it once, and he will be looking to win it twice because this is the second season of PFL Europe. Forgive me for that one. But yeah, Kazuba undefeated, looking to defeat Connor Hughes in the final. Hughes has only lost once himself. That should be a great fight at 155 pounds in the PFL Europe men's lightweight final. Moved on to the welterweight division. Daniele Micheli defeated Ibrahim Mane. So Italy will be represented in that welterweight final. First round TKO finish. Strong performance from Daniele Micheli. And he will face Florim Zendelli, which was probably the biggest upset win of the night. He defeated the very experienced and highly fancied Jack Grant, who was many people's pick to go all the way and win the entire season, having reached the semi-finals. Did not go his way on Fight Night. Zendelli just pushed the pace. And despite Grant doing some good stuff early on in the fight, it was Zendelli that took over and got that split decision, victory to move into the final, where he will now fight for $100,000 and that welterweight title. That then moved us on to the final weight class of the evening in the PFL Europe semi-finals, bantamweights. Alexander Luster moved to 9-1 for his professional career with a very quick rear naked choke finish of France's Julien Pierre Lopez. It took just 75 seconds for Luster to get the job done with a rear naked choke. He looks a very, very dangerous man on the mat. And it's going to be striker versus grappler in the bantamweight final after Lewis McGrillen stepped in on short notice and knocked out Dean Garnett in an absolute barn burner. One of the fights of the year, certainly one of the best fights I've seen in 2024, and probably the best fight we've seen on British soil in quite some time. Absolute back and forth war, both men dropping the other on multiple occasions. We had an unfortunate foul halfway through, which put a pause in the action. Everything continued. Dean Garnett is as tough as they come, as experienced as they come, and proved that after he lost out on in that third round, having been KO'd by a huge left hand from McGrillen, Garnett proved that he's got as much class as anybody you'll find in the game as well. Absolutely top man, and huge respect to him. Someone who, in his career, is now looking to bring through the next generation of talent as something of a role model and a coach to some of the young generation coming up. One member of the young generation is Lewis McGrillen, who revealed after the fight that he'd actually trained with Dean Garnett once or twice in the past, and there was no real bad blood between the pair. It was just, two guys looking for the same goal, both at very different points in their career. And actually leading into the fight, Dean Garnett had said that, make no mistake, Lewis McGrillen's time is coming, but it's not now. Well, we might have to revise that a little bit. I think Lewis McGrillen's time is absolutely coming, and it might be right now. He goes in to the PFL Europe bantamweight final, where he will take on Alexander Luster for the £135 PFL Europe title, $100,000, and possibly a springboard into the Global League. Lewis McGrillen in the Global League would be a whole lot of entertainment. Failing that, maybe he'll come back and look to run the table again in 2025. But to do that, he's got to get past Alexander Luster. And the bad blood has already started. McGrillen has no problem in dropping a few insults here and there to try and wind up his opponent. And he certainly did that during their in-cage face-off. But that was PFL Europe in Glasgow, the PFL Europe Playoffs. Really, really fun night of fights. Some great fights. And that McGrillen versus Garnett fight. I think they've put the full fight on YouTube, actually, PFL Europe. So if you haven't watched it, either get on DAZN and watch it if you've got DAZN, or jump on YouTube. I think they've put the full fight video on there just of that fight. Well worth watching. One of the craziest fights you'll see in 2024. And speaking of crazy, UFC Fight Night Moicano versus Denis in Paris was also pretty nuts. It was a big night for French MMA. Some mixed results for the French competitors, but what we did get was an absolute barn burner of an event. Taking it from the top, Renato Moicano defeating Benoit Saint-Denis in the main event. Eventually stopping him on his stall effectively after round 2. The doctor stopped the fight, quite rightly as well. Moicano absolutely dominated the opening round of that fight. Took Saint-Denis down early and just proceeded to absolutely bust him up with elbows. And looked to get a submission in there as well. But Saint-Denis was wise to it and was able to defend sufficiently to survive the round. But what he couldn't do anything about was the brutal elbows, the slicing elbows from Renato Moicano. And by the time Saint-Denis went back to his corner, his right eye was sliced open in 2 places, and both eyes were starting to swell up. Second round, Saint-Denis actually came back and fought really well, and I think might even have taken that second round on the scorecards. It was a much more competitive round. But by the time he got to the end of that round, after 10 minutes in the cage with Moicano, Saint-Denis' right eye was completely shut. And even though he attempted to bluff his way through the eye test, the vision test that was being administered to him by the cage-side doctor, Saint-Denis was not able to pass that test. The first time, actually, the doctor was holding the fingers up, and Saint-Denis was getting all of the answers right. He looked like, okay, the doctor's going to let him continue. But the reason he was getting all the answers right is because Saint-Denis was looking at the fingers with his good eye. The doctor hadn't covered up the good eye. So the doc realised this, did it again, covered up Saint-Denis' good left eye, and all of a sudden Saint-Denis couldn't get any of the answers right, and proving that he really could not see a thing out of his right hand side, out of his right eye. So a disappointing way for a fight to finish. It's never It's never the most crowd-pleasing way for a fight to end, with a doctor stoppage, but that's what the doctor's there for, to protect the fighter. And that was a good doctor stoppage. The doctor did his job there, and could potentially have saved Benoit Saint-Denis some serious trouble had things progressed as they did in the first round into the third. So we'll see what happens next to Benoit Saint-Denis. I would imagine he's going to sit tight and rest up for a bit, and maybe we'll see him early 2024. As for Moicano, he's made very clear what he wants. There's been talk going on about a potential series of The Ultimate Fighter between Moicano and Paddy Pimblett. I think Pimblett floated the idea a few months back, and Moicano loves the idea. As for the matchup itself, as Moicano said, Moicano thinks it's going to be easy money, and I think that's a slam dunk booking, to be honest. I think it's a great matchup. I think it's a chance for Paddy to catapult himself into the rankings. I think sort of higher up the rankings rather. I think that's the sort of fight that he needs next. As for Moicano, you could argue that he should be looking up the rankings rather than below him in the rankings. But his star is building, his star is growing, and there's no better way, in terms of capitalising on that and really building his star power by coaching a season of The Ultimate Fighter alongside someone like Paddy, who has so much of a following online. It's a perfect scenario for him, and a fight that Moicano believes is very winnable. So for him, I think it's a great plan. It's something that he wants to do, and it'll be interesting to see if the UFC goes for it. As for Paddy fancies his chances very strongly against Moicano, likes him a lot as a character, and thinks that him and Moicano would make for great TV coaching The Ultimate Fighter. And I tend to agree with him. I think they would make for a very, very entertaining season. So who knows? Maybe we'll see it. I have to be honest, The Ultimate Fighter has not been my number one show to watch of late. I've been all over the Contender Series. I love the Contender Series. That's kind of taken over for me because I'm much more of a sport guy than a drama guy. But sometimes when you put the right people in, you got the right coaches in place, then The Ultimate Fighter becomes must-see TV. And I think with Moicano and Pimblett at the helm, I think it would be exactly that. So looking forward to seeing what happens next for Renato Moicano. Co-main event in Paris. Nassourdine Imavov gets the victory over Brendan Allen. Allen had some very interesting things to say on Friday after the weigh-ins. There was accusations of some pretty harsh treatment at the hands of the French Commission. I don't know how much further that's going to be taken. Question marks over why and why he's being asked to give a blood sample and a urine sample immediately after getting off the scale at the official weigh-ins when he's at his most depleted, and he's suggesting that Nassourdine Imavov was not subjected to the same treatment. So if that's true, that's not really on. All the fighters should be treated exactly the same during a fight week. There's no, you've got two guys in a matchup, they should have to go through the same thing. Normally, even when it comes down to like media obligations and stuff, they're generally pretty even in terms of what they have to do. And when it comes to stuff like doping control and stuff like that and providing samples, if one guy in a matchup's being asked, really the other guy should be asked as well. I don't know why that wouldn't be the case, but according to Brendan Allen, it wasn't. So we'll see if any more comes of that. But he put a video up on Instagram and he was very, very pointed in his criticism, going as far as to call the French Commission corrupt. So we'll see what happens from that. But the matchup itself was a super close one, very competitive, as I think we all expected. And in the end, it was Nassourdine Imavov who got that victory. It was a strong third round that got the job done, and a deserved decision win for Imavov, who's now 15-4 in his career and has beaten a lot of big names. And I think he's deserving of a fight with one of the very, very top contenders. He's already got a win over Jared Cannonier, who's fought for the title. He's fought Sean Strickland and gone the distance in the past. I don't know if that's a fight that they could rekindle, have a rematch there. I don't know, but I definitely think that there's scope for Imavov facing somebody in the top 4 or 5 at this point. And, he's on a decent little win streak. He's just beaten Brendan Allen, who himself was on an absolute tear. So, I think we need to put some respect on Imavov's name and see him in there with a top contender in his next fight. That most likely won't be until the end of this year, maybe early next year. But to get a win on home soil for Imavov, that would have been very sweet indeed. Another person who would have had a very, very sweet taste of success was William Gomis, who got a split decision win over Brazil's Joanderson Brito. And the reason why this one would have been extra sweet was some weigh-in shenanigans or face-off shenanigans from Brito, where Gomis offered him his hand to shake his hand, and Brito just grabbed him by the elbow and sort of yanked his arm. It's the sort of thing that you could pick up a nasty little elbow injury or a forearm injury. But Gomis sort of smiled it off, stayed pretty calm through the whole thing. But Brito's clearly trying to get a rise out of the Frenchman. Didn't manage to get one, really. And on Fight Night itself, it was Gomis who got the win. It was a very, very close fight, a very closely contested matchup. And I think in the end, Gomis shaded the first and third rounds on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards to get that win and move up to 14-2 in his career. Huge win for him on home soil. I was talking to Alex Lahore, I think, in the week. French fighter, obviously, based here in the UK. And I think he was saying that Gomis was getting a bit of stick from some of the French fight fans. And there was a few question marks over whether Gomis truly belonged in the UFC. Well, he just went in there and beat Joanderson Brito, who's a pretty solid competitor at 145 pounds. So all power to William Gomis, who gets a big win. One Frenchman who unfortunately didn't get the win on the night was Kevin Jousset, knocked out in the second round by Brian Battle, who just came out there not giving any Fs whatsoever. The French fans giving it to him from the minute he walked into the arena. He was flipping them off and doing all sorts. And to make matters worse, he then went and beat his French opponent, which obviously went down as well as you can expect. But a big win for Brian Battle in his welterweight contest. That was the third of 3 knockouts in a row that kicked off the main card, actually. The first one came from Faraz Ziam, who looked absolutely brilliant against Matt Frevola. Frevola, we all know how tough he is, coming from that Serra-Longo team in New York. And he was sort of significantly undersized against Ziam. He's a big, rangy 55er. Big, lean, tall, long limbs. And it was those long limbs that got the job done for Ziam, but not from long range, bizarrely. It was just coming out of the clinch, and Ziam just sort of forced Frivola's head to one side and then met it perfectly with a huge knee. Frivola's down and out, and absolutely massive knockout, to the point that John Gooden, who is a veteran commentator at this point, has been calling fights in the UFC for many years, and many years prior to that with Cage Warriors, and he said that might have been one of the most brutal knockouts he's ever seen live. So that gives you a sense of just how jaw-dropping that KO was from the man known as the Smile Killer, Faraz Ziam. He's got 16 career wins to his name now, and it feels like after a few fights where he's just getting the win by decision, it feels like he's beginning to find new levels to his game now. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they match him moving forward. Lightweight is a stacked division. It's going to be fun to see just how they match him in the months ahead. And following that fight, another of the big stars to come out of France, former Cage Warriors featherweight champion and French fan favourite Morgan Charrière, the last pirate, taking out Gabriel Miranda and his magnificent moustache in the second round. Huge left hook, completely flattened him. Huge KO. 20 career wins in the books for Morgan Charrière, who, when he's on his game, is a handful for anybody at 145 pounds. He's a superb fighter, and to get that win in that style on home soil would have meant the absolute world to him. That was a huge win. Looking further down the card, Umar Sy, who might not be a big name in many people's lists right now, keep your eyes open for Umar Sy. He's 11-0, undefeated, 205er, looking to work his way up the ladder. He's not wanting to go too fast. He's just building his way gradually, and he picked up a unanimous decision win over Dawoon Jong from South Korea, and he just looks just technically sound everywhere, and he's an absolute unit of a fighter at 205 pounds. He's another one who it's going to be very interesting to see how Mick Maynard and Sean Shelby, the matchmakers, plot his course in the 205 pound division moving forward, because there's just so many good fights now in that weight class, and quite a few of them involving European fighters. So we'll look forward to seeing how he gets booked in late 24, early 25. Further down the card, just looking at the other French fighters involved, Taylor Lapalus getting a unanimous decision win over Vince Morales. And other notables on the card, Aileen Perez from Argentina got a first round arm triangle choke finish over Daria Zheleznyakova. Hope I haven't butchered that. But she's now 11-2, and that was her first finish in the UFC. She lost her debut, but she's won all her fights since, all by decision until yesterday. And she paid tribute to her coaches at the Goat Shed Academy for her victory over there in Paris. It's kind of a nice moment because her debut came in the UFC in Paris, and she lost to Stephanie Egger from Switzerland by submission. 4 or 5 fights later, she's back in Paris. She gets the win by submission, and it's her first submission in the UFC. Made all the more remarkable by the fact that she looked very, very, very bad on the scale at the official weigh-ins. Bad enough for me to think that she shouldn't be fighting on the Saturday, but she really, really looked in big trouble on the scale, and it didn't look good. Thankfully, everything was okay. Thankfully, she looked absolutely fine, and back to her best at the ceremonials later that day. And obviously on Fight Night, she delivered a great performance as well. But that weight cut was clearly a tough one for her, and I hope that future weight cuts for her are more comfortable than that, because that wasn't good to see. It was not fun to watch that at all. So, all the best to Aileen Perez, who would love to bring the UFC back to her native Argentina. I know she lives and trains in Florida now at the Goat Shed Academy, but she'd love to go back to Argentina. I think the UFC have only had one show in Argentina ever. That was back in 2018. I think that was Santiago Ponzinibbio in that main event. But Aileen Perez wants to be the standard bearer for Argentinian mixed martial arts, and she's certainly got a big enough personality for it. So we'll see how things go with her. She's doing very well in her UFC career so far. Another notable is Chris Duncan, Scotland's Chris Duncan, in the first fight of the evening against Belgian fighter Balaji Oki, and Duncan just getting the job done. First round guillotine choke submission. Great performance from the problem, Chris Duncan. And again, hopefully we see him in action early 2024. And he's an exciting fighter to watch. Just go back and watch him win on the Contender Series. Absolute barn burner of a fight on the Contender Series to get his shot in the UFC. And now he's in the UFC. He's doing the business as well. So all power to him. That one was a bounce back win for him, because he got submitted by Manuel Torres in the first round back in February. He was due to fight in the summer. That fight got cancelled. I think he picked up a staph infection in the lead up to that fight, which meant he had to pull out of that one. And then he got rebooked for this past weekend against Balaji Oki. Got the win, and I think his career now stands at 12-2. And he's doing very well, very nicely indeed in the UFC. Had 2 bites of the cherry of the Contender Series before he eventually got in the UFC, and he's there now. He's doing the business. He's 3-1 in the UFC, and he's heading towards the end of the year on good form. So that wraps it up. Great fight night in Paris. The crowd were mental, as they always are. The French fans, they've kind of taken over from the Irish fans a little bit in terms of the UFC, because obviously we don't see the Irish fans at UFC events anymore. In terms of we haven't had an Irish UFC event in a very long time. We haven't had a Conor McGregor fight in the UFC for a very long time. So we haven't really seen that passionate Irish support. They're still there. Don't get me wrong, but we haven't seen it in the UFC for a while, just because they haven't had that opportunity for a while. So hopefully we get to see Mr. McGregor back in the octagon in the not too distant future. And wouldn't it be great if the UFC could get the octagon back over to the 3 Arena, one of the most atmospheric venues in fight sports, I would say. Just there's something special about that place. Every time I've been there, whether it's been a UFC card, whether it's been a Bellator card, it's always something special. The atmosphere is always special. The fans always bring the fun, always bring the atmosphere, and make sure you don't wear any particularly valuable clothing, because you're likely to get showered in beer or Guinness at some point during proceedings. But yeah, we need to see a UFC Dublin event. Hopefully in 2025 we'll get one. Ian Gary's doing the business, Ian Machado Gary. Maybe he can headline an event there in the not too distant. But that's for another day. That's for another day. But I thought we'd give you a quick rundown of what took place this past weekend. PFL Europe Glasgow, UFC Paris. It's so good to see world level promotions putting on these big events again. It wasn't all that long ago that we were starting to wonder if we would ever get these sorts of shows back over here again. And now we've got it. The PFL, I've got the PFL Europe regional shows that are taking place over here. The Bellator brand pretty much largely is going to be based in Europe by the looks of it. And the UFC is starting to bring shows back over to Europe as well. We've had Manchester for UFC 304 earlier this year. And obviously we've just had UFC Paris. So fingers crossed, that is a sign of more to come, with more big European shows coming. And speaking of big European shows, just a couple of weeks away from an absolute whopper of an event in Frankfurt, Germany. Octagon 62. Christian Jungwirth versus Christian Eckerlin in Eintracht Frankfurt Stadium, Deutsche Bank Park, where I'm told more than 60,000 people will be in attendance. That is insane. It will be the biggest event ever held in Europe in terms of attendance, and I think surpassed only by a Pride Shockwave event at the Tokyo Dome, I think it might have been. Which, depending on the reports that you read, had either 60,000 or 90,000 people there. So, depending on those reports, this might even be the biggest attendance in the history of modern mixed martial arts. So that would be quite something. And fingers crossed, I might actually be over there for that one. And if I do, we will do a podcast from there, and I will bring you plenty of behind the scenes stuff from Frankfurt, Germany, at Octagon 62. But that was a great weekend. PFL Europe from Glasgow, UFC from Paris, and hope you enjoyed those fights, and hopefully you're looking forward to what's coming down the line soon. Good stuff coming down the line. UFC 307 is set to take place at Salt Lake City, Utah. That's coming very, very soon. And Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree in the main event. That should be very interesting at £205. But that's for another day. We will preview that in the coming days. But until then, enjoy the rest of the week, and I'll speak to you soon.